It's actually, thank you, by the way, for coming down to see me.
Pleasure.
I know that you've come all the way from Bedford.
Yeah. Have you ever been?
Of course I've been, yeah. I used to travel all over the country to try and recruit people. Pretty much most of the cities, actually, I used to go to. I was 17 years old after my expulsion from Newham College for murder, but I didn't kill anyone. It was my bodyguard that killed people, and then he ended up in jail, got life. But I was 17. I started recruiting people at Cambridge University.
Whoa. Back up.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You can't just...
So I was at Newham College in East Ham. You know East Ham?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was basically recruiting people to Hizb ut-Tahrir, my group. In those days, right? So I'm 44 now. I think we're about the same age.
43, yeah.
Yeah. So I call it, I'm 1 year older than you, but basically in those days, it was, you'll remember when like the Anti-Nazi League, the A&L, like the socialist workers had a little thing called the Anti-Nazi League, and it was all like hip hop and anti-racism versus. So in those days, Muslim political organization was brand new. It was we were the first generation that started organizing young Muslims on the streets because we were the first generation that were born and raised here. So when I left home at 16 and I went to Newham College, and basically because I was in Hizb ut-Tahrir, I was a recruiter for this group. I started organizing people in the East Ham campus in Newham College. And eventually I stood for the student union. And my whole slate were activists that were serving with me in this group. So I stood as president, and every single union office position was my activists. So we basically started this huge campaign, and we won. So we took over the student union. I was president, and the women's officer, the whatever, the finance, all of the positions were Hizb ut-Tahrir activists, all calling for a caliphate, right? So we took over this college. And then, of course, there was trouble because a lot of kids in the college weren't used to the fact that we suddenly became politically active. And there was some tensions. And this guy came, his name is Saeed Noor, a huge guy. He turns up one day, and I hear in the college that somebody's looking for me. And the way I was raised, if someone's looking for you, you go and find them. So I went and found this guy, huge guy, and I said, what do you want? And he said, I'm here to protect you. I said, what do you mean you're here to protect me? He goes, well, I heard from the scenes and the brothers that you're doing a good job in the college, and I'm going to be your bodyguard. Came out of nowhere. So I was like, all right then, you're a kid, you don't really think these things through.
Feels prestigious.
Yeah, so I said, all right then. And then there was trouble. And this one kid called Ayatunde Obonobe, bless his soul, I'm not trying to brag or anything, because, it's sad. A person died, and I always remember this because that's a human life, But he, unfortunately, one day, he pulled two knives out and started trying to stab Saeed Noor, right? Because as a result of these tensions. And I was standing right there, and I said to Saeed Noor said to the guy, actually, he said, look, if you don't put your knives away, you're going to get into trouble. I'm going to have to kill you. This is literally what he said to him. And Ayatunde wasn't listening. He had two of them, and he was slashing at Saeed Noor's leather jacket, and he was making contact. So to be fair, and this is what I said to the police at the time, considering the circumstances, Saeed Noor was quite patient, because he said to him, you stop that or I'm going to have to kill you. It's literally what he said to the guy. And the guy didn't stop, so then he pulled out this huge machete and just plunged it straight through his heart. And then a whole bunch of other people started hammering him in my head, and the guy died. It was really sad. And I put this in my book, actually. So we got expelled. So the college expelled the college expelled the president's student union, which is me and all my committee. All of us in one go got expelled. The police came and they found me in my parents' home in Essex, and they said, we want to talk to you about the killing. So I said, all right, I've got nothing to hide. I was there. So I told him the story I'm telling you. I said, look, in my amateur 16-year-old brain, I'm telling you, I think it was self-defense because he was being slashed at. Anyway, he went down for murder. I think he got life. The other kid, one of them with a hammer, he was juvenile, so he didn't get life, but he got a long time. I think he got 10 years or something. And they all went down. That was probably Britain's first jihadi street murder. That was probably that.
Wow.
So we got kicked out. And then my mum put her foot down. She got really upset, as you can imagine. And she said, you got to go to this grammar school. And I said, I'm not going to grammar school. I went to State Comprehensive. I went to Cecil Jones. That school got shut down after I left it.
A lot of my listeners are American. Yeah. You probably want to explain what a grammar school is.
Yeah, so the grammar schools are selective schools where you pass an exam at 11. And if you pass this exam at 11, everyone that passes that exam goes to this school for smart kids. Yeah, I didn't pass that exam, but I got quite good GCSEs, which is the exams you do at 16.
Yeah.
I say quite good. I got 1A in art, and that was it. The rest were B's and C's and D's. But she thought I was just not trying hard enough. So she said, look, I don't know how this happened. She managed to organize an interview with a headmaster. And she said, you got to go in there and he's willing to meet you. So I thought, shit, I'm not going to tell him about the murder. So I went into this. So I went in, right? And his name's Mr. Baker, right? So I'm there now. I've just been freshly expelled, right? Everyone in Southend's like thinking, shit, who's this guy? There's a murderer. He's been expelled. He's back now. And I'm in this grammar school where I feel like I don't belong. Anyway, so I'm speaking to the headmaster and he's like, why do you want to come to this school? And I'm like, well, my mum said I have to. And he says, all right, well, convince me what you're going to bring to the school. So I started talking to him. And he let me in. He gave me an unconditional offer. So I ended up doing A-levels in this grammar school. And then that's when I was recruiting at Cambridge. But fast forward, this is a funny story. It has a funny ending. Fast forward about, I'd say 7-8 years ago, my economics teacher in that school, I did economics, politics, history. Well, my A-levels.
I did economics A-level.
Did you? So I got an A for economics, right? So my economics teachers, the two of them, right? One became a magistrate, Mr. Moth, and Mr. Skelly became the headmaster after Mr. Baker. So Mr. Skelly's now headmaster and he's loving the work I'm doing. So he contacts me. He says, come back. I want you to speak to the whole school. So I says, all right, I went back there. Mr. Baker is about to retire and he's in the audience. So I get up and I've got the entire school in front of me, right? The whole, not just my class or my A-levels, the whole damn school's there, from the little 11-year-olds all the way up to the 18-year-olds doing their A-levels. And I'm giving this speech and I'm talking about this whole story. And he didn't know, until that day, Mr. Baker didn't know that when I came to him at 16, it was just after his expulsion for murder. So I tell the story and then I say, and poor Mr. Baker didn't even realize he let a kid into this school that got expelled for murder. His face went beetroot red. All the kids started laughing. Everyone was finding it hilarious, apart from Mr. Baker, who was like, but it was funny. And he appreciated it in the end because he knew it ended well,
So tell me about this group, HT. I'm not going to try and pronounce it.
Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Yeah, I'm still not going to try. How did you end up being part of it? What was it? Yeah.
It's going to sound a bit violent, but I grew up with, so this wasn't the first knife fight that we had a lot of trouble in Southend. So by the time I was 15, I'd probably seen more people stabbed than you have in your entire life.
Is that racial tensions from the area?
Yeah, a lot of racial violence.
Right.
So Combat 18.
Yeah.
So 18, it stands for the initials of Adolf Hitler. The 1 is A, and the 8 is H. And these were at the time former British Army who'd served in Northern Ireland, some of whom, the bad apples of whom, decided to become Combat 18 in their spare time. Now in Southend in Essex, we didn't have the proper geezers that were with them. We had their little young followers, and obviously we were young, right? So I was 14, 15 years old. And it would be you're just literally a walking target. It'd be walking down the street and suddenly you just hear someone shout "Packy," and they jump out the back of a white van. It was always white vans in those days, and they'd have hammers and they'd have machetes and they just literally hunt you for sport. And so there's more friends look, Michael Giddings, Mo, we used to call him, half Kenyan, mixed friend of mine. He had a hammer put to his head. He was whacked around the head with a hammer. Aaron got stabbed when I was 15. Aaron and we were in this big knife fight with Rowan and a mate of mine and Aaron, a mate of mine. And these guys turned up, started calling us, because we were mixed group, West Indians and me, right? So there's obviously all forms of racial insults. Aaron got stabbed on that day. It was multiple problems we had, by the end of which I started carrying a knife strapped to my back for self-defense and protection against hardcore neo-Nazis with hammers and machetes. Now, at the same time, the Bosnia genocide was going on against Muslims in Bosnia. Srebrenica, the 3,000 men and boys that were massacred in the mass grave there. So you can imagine we were looking at this from the domestic scene, looking at the fact that we were being targeted. And then abroad, you see Bosnian Muslims who probably are white, with many of them blonde hair, blue eyes, but they were Muslim. So we thought, fucking hell, what chance do we have if that's going to happen? 2 hours flight, by the way, from London, and the Olympics had just been hosted there. So I thought, hold on, that's civilization. Yeah, it's not like it was like some backwater, and suddenly that's happening. And I know that can happen here because I'm facing it. So that's what, to answer your question, began my journey to almost in a sense of the cycle of violence, to express myself and that anger through a reciprocal form of Muslim supremacism when faced with genocide and white supremacism. And so I basically decided that it starts with you need to defend yourself. It ends up with I'm better than you. And that's where we ended up. So we joined Hizb ut-Tahrir. I joined at 16 years old. And the basic ethos...
Well, the goals of the group,
Yeah, the basic ethos is we wanted to establish a global caliphate. This is so, again, for your audience, it's important to put this into context. This is before Al-Qaeda. This is before terrorism was associated with Muslims. At the time, you remember this because you're my age, terrorism was Irish. It was the IRA. And if you're lucky, you'd hear something about the left-wing terrorists. So when the Israeli jet was hijacked by the Palestinians, it was a left-wing group. It wasn't a Muslim group, right? It was like these communists. Yasser Arafat and all those guys were left-wingers. They were secular. And the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, these were all left-wing and communist groups. It only became Islamist, and by that term I mean a desire to impose one version of Islam over society, as opposed and as distinct from Muslim, which is just a traditional religious Muslim. It only became Islamist as the Afghan war kicked off in the 80s, and with the CIA backing the Arab fighters and bin Laden in Afghanistan to defeat the Soviets. That's when the Islamist thing kicked off, right? It was CIA funded initially. But up until, and that took a while to reach the rest of the world, so up until we came along, terrorism wasn't associated with Muslims. We had, if you think of it this way, we were more like the Trotsky to the Stalin of Al-Qaeda, right? So we developed the intellectual ideas for the caliphate and popularized them among Muslims. And it's that sentiment that Al-Qaeda then built on to say, right, okay, you guys want a caliphate, we're going to bring violence to try and bring that caliphate about. So we were just like the group that was saying, we've got to have a global caliphate. Our means of getting that would have been to infiltrate militaries, to recruit soldiers for military coups, which I also did, but that's another story.
Yeah. How much structure was there to this group?
Very structured.
And how global was it? Because if you're saying you're about 15, 16, that was about when I first remember having access to the internet, but it was very limited. It was lists on Yahoo. It was pre-Google. That's right. So it wasn't like it is now.
So you would have had very limited access, but we were trained in using, that was our modern tool, right? That was our blockchain. That was our, right? So we use that in a way that today you see black marketeers using cryptos, right? We were the ones that pioneered the use of the internet for communication purposes for subversive messaging. So we were heavily reliant on the internet. The group was global. It had one leader under which pretty much every country you can think, certainly every Muslim majority country had a chapter of our organization nationally and then into cities. Here in the UK, we packed 12,000 Muslims into Wembley Arena for a caliphate conference, actually. In 1994, I think it was, we put orange stickers all over the country. Some people will remember them. It said Khilafa, which is the Arabic word for caliphate, coming soon to a country near you. And we whacked them all over the country. I remember whacking them on police cars and finding it really funny. But we packed 12,000 people into Wembley Stadium. That's just here into Wembley Arena, sorry. That's just here in the UK. They came from all over Europe. But the group was founded in, just to give you some sense of its history, it was founded in 1953 in Jerusalem. It's an old group. It's not as big as it used to be. A bit like, people went from being whatever, socialist to, anti-globalism protesters, whatever. But this group was massive in the 90s.
So it was established by Palestinians?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the founder, his name's Sheikh Taqiyuddin Nabhani, is a Palestinian. He founded it in Jerusalem.
Wow.
Yeah.
And your role within the group, I mean, Danny was telling me beforehand that you rose pretty quickly through the group.
Yeah. So I ended up, basically I set it up in, I was the first British Pakistani member to go to Pakistan. I set it up in Pakistan. I set up the Danish-Pakistani chapter in Denmark. And then went to Egypt, and I revived the group in Egypt because it had been crushed after an attempted coup. So the assassins of the former president, the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, was assassinated in 1981. And the assassins were the jihadis who used to be members of my group. So what happened was they did what I just described to you. They basically got impatient and said, right, we're now going to use violence. And so there was a guy called Salim Rahal, who was a member of my group, who trained the guys that ended up assassinating Anwar Sadat in Egypt in 1981 for attempting peace with Israel after the peace treaty. I ended up in prison with those guys, but that's another part of the story as well. But basically, when I went to Egypt, it was to revive that chapter because they wiped the group out after the failed coup attempt, after the assassination. So I was then head of the Alexandria chapter in Egypt, attempting to revive the group there. That was the tough part because it was quite a dangerous gig. I was 21.
Right.
I got arrested at 24. So all of that happened before I was 24. So I was quite young. And then when I got back from Egypt, after the 5-year sentence in prison, the British chapter wanted to make me the leader here. I was on their leadership committee, and then they made me the offer. So 1 week before, they had told me that's what they wanted to do, but 1 week before, 1 week after they told me that, I basically quit the group, and that was at the age of 28.